There is nothing wrong under the sun with desiring to be married. And if you're single and that's your desire, I think God puts that desires in our hearts. So great. Just beware that if there's things that we deeply desire and are really praying for, that the enemy will send counterfeits. And not every prophetic word that you receive is from God. The Bible does say very clearly to test the spirits, but that initial hook was in there. I've waited quite some time to be able to do this particular podcast. This is going to be a different one today. You know, I've shared in bits and pieces over some of the earlier podcasts on something that I've been going through for the past year and a half. And there were reasons that I was not able to share the story. And I've been waiting for the right time. I've been waiting for the time when I was able to, but also just waiting on that confirmation from God that it was time to share the story. And of course, as always happens in God's timing, a story of intense stress becomes a testimony. And I was feeling coming up to this week that perhaps it was time. Perhaps I should share the story now. And then this morning I was having a time with God, and there were tears. There were some things that were still kind of stuck in there from this last year and a half. And I started to say, I don't know if I want to share this today. I don't know if I'm ready. And then as I talked and as Jesus met me and as we walked together, I realized I think I'm supposed to share it today. And it's so interesting because, I have a moment, right? I'm in my bathroom, I'm getting ready because, you got to put on a little makeup to do a podcast, especially for the video portion. And I'm in there and I'm putting my makeup on and I'm starting to feel it. I'm starting to feel the move of the Holy Spirit to share, to talk, to speak. And then after a moment, I heard this other voice that was condemning. What are people going to think? You are going to look like a fool. You think you're a leader, you're going to look like an idiot. And I thought, oh, yeah, it's definitely time. So I am going to be sharing with all of you what's been happening. What have I been going through? And my hope and my heart and my prayer is to be able to share it a bit layered. On the one hand, there is the surface of a relationship that I was in that I thought was going to become a marriage that ended not becoming a marriage and then ended up being a really destructive story. But there is also this other side of programming and assignments and the way that things can come in and the way that our hearts can be programmed, whether you're like me and maybe you've been a victim of Satanism or mind control, or you've grown up in a home where there were models and things that were shown to you that were not helpful, that were toxic, and you develop these belief systems, these strongholds that maybe have led you to connect with people, whether it be in romantic relationship or in your work or any of those places that are not helpful, that are toxic. And there's ways that our hearts can get really hooked in. So that's my heart. I'm hoping to be able to share it on all those levels. I am going to be really open and honest and vulnerable because I think it's helpful. And the other thing that I realized as I came into this and that condemning voice was there trying to condemn me, the truth is, yes, I feel like I've done a lot of work and a lot of healing, and I've really done my best to walk as close to Jesus as I possibly can, though at times I've done it really well and in times not so much. But I'm still a work in progress. And there is a certain, I think, anointing or gifting of wisdom that I've been given, but that does not mean that I have it all figured out. And I never want to position myself as someone who has it all figured out and I know and I've got it all together. I don't want to do that because it's not true. And so I'm just going to share this openly, honestly, and hopefully it's helpful to someone. And, hopefully you can glean something from this story. And I just want to say to anybody listening, I've walked with so many different people over the years, and in my experience, there's typically something in our life that is a disappointment, a discouragement, an area that we're working on, and or an area that, oh my gosh, I thought I would receive blessing in this area. I thought this part of my life would look different. I thought the promises of God would have already taken root in this part of my life, and they haven't. And sometimes what happens is we start to bury that. We start to compare ourselves to other people, and we start to feel like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to get there, and I'm just less than everyone else. And I just want to speak into that lie. It is a lie from the enemy. It can even be a lie from your generational line that is trying to pull you into mediocrity and keep you from stepping into the fullness that the Lord has for you. Because it doesn't matter who we are, there's always something that we're working on, and there's always areas that God is looking to grow in us. And no matter what happens, he will use it for good if you let him. So this whole story really started back in 2019. And if you've listened for any amount of time, you've heard the story. I won't get into it in depth, but I left a marriage and a church all at the same time. And it was a marriage I'd been in for 9.5 years, and it had been very difficult, and a church that was covering up abuse. And I was a voice in that whole thing, ultimately ostracized by leadership because I was speaking up, because I was saying the truth, because I was saying this isn't right. And they tried to muddy my name and all kinds of things. And so that's what I had just walked away from. And so here I was in 2020, my practice was still really doing well, but I was living in an Airbnb and living in the valley, and it was quite a season. I didn't have my dogs with me at the time, and a lot of my close friends, though I was still in deep connection with them, many of them had moved, and so some of them had moved to Texas and other areas, and so I didn't have the as much in-person community, though I did have some, thank goodness. And I was so fortunate. I had, beautiful, powerful women of God that I could connect with every single week. So it wasn't like I was just floating out there, but everything had changed. Everything was different. And I never thought I would go through a divorce. So that was a hard one for me to grapple with. And then it was COVID, and, all of these things were happening. But in the midst of that, I had been led to go to this church. It was a little church, and I had found it or gotten there through a friend of mine. And I just felt like the Lord was calling me there. And so I started going, and I was trying to kind of interject myself in. Uh, it wasn't as warm and fuzzy. People were not necessarily opening their arms. But as I went for a little while, I started to develop some connections. And I just knew in my heart, I needed that. I needed a community. I needed to belong to something. Looking back, again, being really honest and very truthful, I believe that part of that for me was I had just left a system, and I felt uncomfortable without a system, and I needed to interject myself into a system. So I think both of those layers were going on at the same time. And so there was this guy that went to this particular church, and he was a worship leader. And I remember seeing him and not thinking much of it at first. And then later on, looking at him, thinking, he's kind of cute, even though he was not a person I would normally have been attracted to. And then he spoke at one point and said his age, and I realized he was quite a bit younger than me. And so I just thought, oh, yeah, he's too young. And I kept going. And one day he approached me, and we started to talk. And I remember in that conversation, the first time I spoke to him, I thought, oh, he's going to be my best friend. Like, this is somebody I'm going to be a good friend with. There was something about him that felt very different than, men that I had normally either been attracted to or had been friends with. There was a softness, there was an approachability, there was kind of an innocence, a seeming innocence there, like not in a purity of heart is what it felt like. And I aligned with that because that was me. I really strove to have this purity of heart, and it felt like we were connecting in that way. And so down the road, we ended up going for a hike, and that's kind of where it started. Just a hike. We went to lunch, and I just thought, he seems like a really, really cool guy. I'm so glad that I have this friend. And then we ended up going to a concert, and it was interesting because I had really prayed to God. I was going to this concert, and I had really prayed that there would be somebody to go with me. And him and I ended up talking at church, and it turned out he was already planning to go to the same concert. And so when he came, we sat together. And so bit by bit, we ended up building this friendship that I don't know if it was quickly, but eventually it turned into a dating relationship. And in the beginning, I was happy. There was a safety that I felt. I felt like I could be myself. I had come out of this marriage that had been really narcissistic, and this guy had been unfaithful and abusive. And I remember when I first went to lunch with this younger man, and we were talking about past relationships, and he'd gone through a breakup a while ago, and I had gone through a divorce, and I remember was in the middle of a divorce. I remember him saying to me, "You're so gorgeous. Who would ever cheat on you?" And that was the hook, my friends. There was a hook in there. It it got to this place inside that I had been so longing to hear. So longing. I had felt so unattractive in the marriage that I was in. I had felt like I wasn't enough. I wasn't, and especially when it came to physicality, I did feel pretty enough. It's kind of the narcissistic way to tear a person down bit by bit. And I had gone from feeling this beautiful, confident woman to coming out of this feeling like I wasn't pretty. And so when he said that to me, it lit up something inside. And the divorce from my ex-husband happened pretty quickly. I ended up filing it in uh, November of 2019. Um, I was paid out of the house by February of 2020. And so this new guy, we're going to call him Ted. I'm not going to say his actual name, but this new guy, Ted, and I, at that point, we were friends. We had gone to the concert. We were talking, but not a lot. And then eventually, I would say around maybe May of 2020, April, May, somewhere in there, we started to date. We started to spend time, weekly. It in retrospect, like looking back, I think it was too much too soon. My divorce was done and over in June of 2020. I was able to file my taxes as a single person in 2019 because we had already figured everything out. The only reason that it had taken that long for the paperwork to come through is just because of COVID. So it wasn't necessarily a legality, but it was more of I had come out of so much, and I was in a very vulnerable position. I had just a year and a half prior connected with, I've been raised in Satanism. Like I've been subjected to satanic ritual abuse, and I'd been doing this deep healing through that. And I don't think I was ready for a serious relationship. But again, I think that there was a part of my heart, this inner drive that wanted to go back into a system. My marriage, just like my old church, had been a system. And I wanted that again because the system felt secure to me. And I wanted that security. And so, fairly early on in this relationship with Ted, I felt like I was hearing the Lord say, "This is the person you're going to marry." And I had a couple people that gave prophetic word to me very early on who didn't know anything that this was the guy I was going to marry. I need to say this right here. Be very careful and very prayerful when it comes to areas where you've had a lot of pain, a lot of injury, areas where you have vulnerability, because the enemy is very sneaky. When you have been subjected to, whether it's you, like I said, mind control, Satanism, or you've just been in toxicity, it's not uncommon in areas where we've experienced toxicity, trauma bonding, for the voice of the Holy Spirit to get muddled. And we start to hear a voice that is very close, but because it's what our itching hearts and our itching ears want to hear, we grab it. We grab onto it, and we so want it to be true. And it's another layer, and it's another hook, and it's another way that the enemy can get in there. I wanted that. I wanted that security. I wanted to know that things were set in my life again. And even though I was starting to step into this adventure with God, I started to go back into this system of I want that. I want that security. Now, let me say this. There is nothing wrong under the sun with desiring to be married. There's nothing wrong with that. And if you're single and that's your desire, I think God puts that desires in our hearts. And so great. Just beware that if there's things that we deeply desire and are really praying for, that the enemy will send counterfeits. And not every prophetic word that you receive is from God. The Bible does say very clearly to test the spirits. But that initial hook was in there. This guy was looking at me through eyes of being enamored. And coming out of the difficulty I'd come out of, I started to run this story and this narrative in my head that God was redeeming the story. And this was how. And it was this guy. I think we have to be really careful of the visions that we create in our minds and the things that we tell ourselves and where we start to plan our future before it ever happens, because it can take us away from really walking closely with the Lord. Now, I walk closely with the Lord, but that didn't mean that I had given over every area to him. I'll be honest, I had some frustration with God when I got married. I had feelings. When I was married, our first kiss was on our wedding day. And in the church I went to, I was told that if that's what you did, then your marriage would be amazing because you honored God in the building process and in the engagement process. And therefore, life would go well for you. And so I was so disappointed, discouraged, frustrated, devastated when that marriage did not go well. I was so hurt. And getting the divorce was really hard. And at the time that it happened, it was really hard. And there was some hurt in my heart there. And if I'm, again, digging really in and being really honest, I feel like a part of me, because I am a make it happen person, instead of waiting on the Lord, I was like, I need to make this happen. I don't know if I was so conscious of that, because while I was dating Ted, my prayers were, Lord, if this is from you, move it forward. If this is not from you, rip it apart. Like, just make it break up. But I really didn't want that. I really, in my heart of hearts, didn't want that. I was sure that Ted was the person, and I was just praying this prayer because that was the right thing to do. That way I was being surrendered to God. But I don't know if I fully was. I know that, again, I did have some hurts. And so early on in our dating relationship, there began to be these purity struggles. And that was new for me. I'd never had that happen in all my Christian walk. And it really muddied the waters. I had a friend ask me recently that, in the relationship that I move into next, she said, are you planning to save yourself till marriage? And I said, absolutely, I am. Absolutely. Uh, those purity struggles really did muddy things. And it it caused me to not see clearly. And a part of me felt like, well, it's okay. I started to justify it a bit. Now, at the same time, I was also very open with these powerful Christian women that were in my life. I didn't hide it. I didn't pretend that I wasn't struggling. I prayed into it a lot. I talked to God about it a lot because I was wrestling. I was wrestling with, obviously I want to be doing this, but I was also wrestling with, I know deep down it's not right. I may be trying to justify this and, make it like it's okay, but I know it's not right. Looking back, one of the things that I realized is that when I had spoken to Ted initially about this and about my convictions, and even though he said he agreed, his take on it was like, yeah, but that's almost an impossibility. And I realized looking back, he took that boundary that I set and that place where I wanted to stay in purity as something to overcome. He was pushing the boundaries. He was not trying to hold up purity in our relationship at all. But at the time, I didn't see it. And so we go into this relationship, we start dating. I took him to meet some friends of mine. They really liked him. I started to have him meet some of my friends. And for the most part, I really liked the relationship. But as time progressed, I started to notice that he wasn't really posting about me on social media. Uh, a part of it felt a little hidden, which was surprising to me. I had never experienced that before. Uh, but I didn't make it a huge deal. We talked about it. Part of it was he was really kind of under the thumb of this pastor at this small church, and he had some concerns about that. He eventually, did share with the pastor that we were dating. So I just took it as that's something he has to work out. The other thing that was happening for me is that even though I was enjoying this time, I was getting activated pretty easily. I felt suspicious. I felt my nervous system activating. And I kept telling myself it's PTSD because I was cheated on in my marriage, because I had a difficult marriage. I need to heal from that. I don't want to put this on Ted. And so I was very careful to not put it all on him. I mean, there may have been times where I brought things up, but a lot of times I didn't. I didn't bring up um, future. I didn't bring up any of that. And eventually I left that smaller church just because of the control and some of the things that I was seeing. I left on good terms. And then it was about probably a year into our relationship, and I was already gone, going to another church. Ted was still going to the older church, and he relayed a conversation that he'd had with that pastor. And in this conversation, he basically says to me, some couples wait 4 or 5 years before they get married. And then it just hit me like, oh, we're not on the same page. I'm not down to hang out for 4 or 5 years. Maybe this isn't what I thought it was. And so I waited maybe a few days, and I brought it up to him and had a conversation. And he didn't take the conversation very well. He was like, I haven't really thought about this. And I was thinking, that's so weird, because I've experienced where I was very sure he wanted to talk to me about marriage. I could feel it. I could sense it. We know those things. So it was very confusing. I ended up breaking up and just saying, look, it looks like we're not on the same page. I think you're a great guy. I enjoy our relationship, but I don't want to hang out in limbo. That's just not what I want to do. I don't feel led that way. And so I ended the relationship, and I felt some peace. I felt like everything was going to be okay. And sure enough, within a week, Ted reached out to me. We had a conversation, and he just said, look, I had a moment of fear. Of course, I knew that we were going to need to talk about marriage. And of course, I want to marry you. You're my person. I just asked that let me be the one to broach it. Let me be the one to bring it up. And so I said, okay. And that was it for a while. And then I moved, and I bought this house, and he started going to the church that I was going to. And there was a point in time where I noticed that he was following some things on Instagram that just weren't quite appropriate. And I brought that up to him, and it took him a little bit to unfollow it. And so there was this tension that I was starting to experience of, man, he's presenting one way, but I feel like under the surface, there's something different going on. But I will tell you, there was so much of a hook in me. I I didn't, even though I addressed it, I didn't allow myself to really and truly face what I was actually feeling and sensing. I started to deny the very intuitive voice and heart that the Lord had given me. And also, Ted was so gentle and apologetic and quick to repair that I just kept thinking, I think I'm overreactive. I don't think he's had a lot of relational experience. There is an age difference. I had all these excuses. And I just want to say to somebody who's listening, listen to your heart, listen to your voice, lean in. But I also want to say, if you are anyone who's been programmed, know that there are points in times in that programming where it takes over to such a degree. It's like you don't even feel like yourself. Don't beat yourself up for that. Keep leaning into the Lord. He will help you break free. And so, along this time and during this timeline, I also started to connect with flashbacks that were starting to happen of some of the deeper mind control experiments that I had been subjected to. And I don't know if I would have gotten there any other way. Of course, at the time, I didn't see it that way. But at the time, it was like, I'm in this place of, I really like this guy and he seems to really like me. And a lot of our relationship seems really easy, but there's these undercurrents that feel really wrong. And I feel hooked into something that I almost don't have power over. And that seems to be getting to this place of these deeper things that I've experienced, and all of it's happening at the same time. And I can't say that I was fully aware of all those things, but I was aware of some of it. And so a little bit into longer into our relationship, I became very convicted about the purity side of things. And the Lord really had to talk with me. And so I had to talk with Ted and just said, look, it had been several months since there'd been any kind of fall or anything, but I just told him, the Lord spoke to me, and there will be no more struggles. There will be nothing. And he was in full agreement. And I would say there was a couple of times after that talk where I think he would have liked to have tried something that I quickly shut down, because once the Lord really spoke to me, I just, it was like, oh no, that's it. Like, he's had a lot of grace on this area, and now, okay, that's it. And that was it. So I would say a good 2.5 years of this relationship were pure. And ultimately, what ended up happening is he just didn't keep his word on moving things forward. Uh, Even though he was no longer under that pastor's thumb, he still really wasn't posting much. He'd post here and there on social media, but it just, something felt hidden and not right. I noticed that there were ways that he seemed to covet his phone. I noticed that there were times when he would say he was on these phone calls because he was always helping other people, but something didn't feel right. And ultimately, I just realized, he didn't keep his word. And at the time, he was feeling much more like a buddy than a romantic relationship. It just didn't have that same connection. We were good friends. We would say we were best friends. We voice texted every day. We saw each other all the time. The other thing that had happened during our relationship is that in 2023, I lost 3 animals back to back. Oh, devastation, you all. I was so devastated. If sometimes when I do my podcast, you hear my birds in the background, or maybe you hear my dog snoring over here. Animals are my family, and this was like losing family members. I was devastated. I was in such a place of devastation. I was still leading trainings. I was still working with people, but I was so heartbroken. And so Ted, who would come over and would stay over at my house, maybe a couple times a week. Again, it was completely pure, but he might sleep on the couch or sleep in the other room. What ended up happening is he started staying every night to help me during this time. And that just turned into every night and every night and every night and every night. And then and at first I appreciated it because, oh my gosh, that was so hard for me. I felt so horrible about my bird. You know, was so devastated that I had to have my dog put down. It was a tough time. There was a lot going on with my family at that time. Um, they had become aware that my book had been published, and there was just a lot going on. And so there was a solace that I took for a little while that he was here. But things had really shifted in our relationship at that point also. He started to have a lot of money issues. And even though he was working, it was like he never had money. And it was, oh, because of this medical expense or this thing. And because I am that just big hearted person. And I, if somebody I care about is struggling, I want to help them. And so that had started to happen. And then I started to realize, like, he's here all the time. And so I had to talk with him, like, look, it's as if you live here. It feels like we live together. And I don't think this is healthy. We're not married. And so he had eventually said, you're right. I'll start staying back at my place. Uh, and so, but he didn't. And as a matter of fact, after I had talked to him about that, I noticed, like, he's staying here even more regularly. Like, it just felt like I had spoken it, and he just, like, completely walked over my boundary. So all of those things really led up to this breakup. And so I ended the relationship. And it's so interesting, you all, because one of the things that happened right before I ended the relationship is that I spoke at the church. I spoke at this big tent thing that we were having, and I sang for the first time in front of people since I was like 12 years old. It was this huge testimony. And Ted was a musician. So he was the one that was behind me playing acoustic guitar. And I'm so grateful to God that in spite of everything that's happened, that moment is not tainted for me. That was a beautiful moment. And it was a really cool thing that I got to do that. And I had this comfortability with Ted. So we were able to practice the song. We didn't practice it very much, but it came out beautifully. And I'm so grateful that in spite of everything, that isn't tarnished for me. And that's why I believe this relationship was so confusing for me, is because of that. Like, I share this, right? And I can hear it and think, man, that was way too long that this guy was freeloading. Like, cause he was. But there were all these other elements that were so beautiful and good. And I felt like it's just a tough time. I'm just, I'm just helping him. And it wasn't like I was paying his bills or anything like that. But when somebody is staying at your place and they're not paying any bills and contributing, it's still a drain. So I end the relationship. And this was in May of last year. So May of 2024, I end the relationship. And when I ended the relationship, there were some things that he said that I was kind of surprised by. Things that he apparently had an issue with that he had never shared with me. At one point I said to him, I feel like there were times you were telling me what I wanted to hear. And it was so confusing to me. Some of the things that he was saying, I was like, that is so bizarre. But then he came back to have another conversation the next night and said, I was just in a defensive posture. I really didn't mean those things. And I just thought, something is really off here. Something is really off. I will say that for the most part, though my friends, most of them liked him or thought he was okay, most of them also felt like we were not a match. We weren't maybe at the same place in life in a lot of ways. And like I said, he wasn't somebody I would have normally been attracted to. So I think they looked at it like, oh, I thought this was something that wasn't going to last, and we're surprised it's lasted. But I do also want to say, have safe people in your life and listen to them. There were some friends that toward the end really did start to speak in of things that were starting to be alarm bells for them. And I'm glad that I listened, and I'm glad that I heard them. I feel like they maybe had some of these checks even earlier on, but weren't sure how to say it to me. So I just wanted to say that. And again, I think from a programming perspective and an assignment perspective, there was a lot that had gotten convoluted. It was like a shadow coming over me in relation to him. And sometimes those people that are close to us or have an element where they feel like family, we start to become blinded. We can all have that kind of programming. However, I broke up with this guy thinking, well, we're going to be friends. We go to the same church. We have a lot of the same friends. This is going to be easy. It felt like we were already in that place anyway. So we went for a walk on the day that I broke up with him. And I did notice this aggression that I hadn't seen before, a desperation that I hadn't seen before. He grabbed my jacket a couple times and yanked on it. And that was really surprising to me. I'd never seen that. But I chalked it up to a breakup conversation. And then he kept wanting to talk, and he kept wanting to talk. And he asked if our relationship was 100% over. And I said, absolutely. And he kept wanting to talk. And I was going through some other stuff at the time too. There was a lot going on, you all. But in June, I ended up agreeing to talk with him because I realized I needed a month of no contact, no talking. I just needed to unravel. And then I thought, I need a month, and then we can figure out how to be friends. So he comes over to my house, and the only reason he came over to my home is because I was so sick. We were supposed to talk on a Sunday. That didn't work because I was so sick. And then, Monday came around, and I just thought to myself, I need to have this conversation. because if I don't have this conversation, he's going to keep trying to talk to me. And right now I need to breathe. So he comes over. I talk to him. I tell him, I need to unravel from things. I need a month where there's no talking. And then after a month, we can figure out how to be friends and how to be in this community together. But right now, if I see you at church, I might wave across the room, if that, but I need the space. And so he said he understood. And at one point I started to cry, and I was sitting in a chair. It's kind of a bigger chair, not a love seat, but one of those, kind of oversized chairs. And he's on the couch. And the moment I started to cry, he stands up, comes over and squeezes like next to me in the chair. And I looked at him, and he put his arm around me. Even the way he put his arm around me didn't feel like comfort. It felt like an advance, and leans in and he tries to kiss me. And I went, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I don't care that you're sick." And I said, "I do. You need to leave." And he said, "You want me to go?" And I said, "I absolutely want you to go." And so he stood up, and I stood up, and he grabbed my arms and stepped backward and pulled me on top of him on the couch and groped me. And I jumped up and said, "You need to leave right now." And he didn't seem to take that as an embarrassment. He kind of went, "Oh, you really want me to go?" And I said, "You need to go right now." And I remember in that moment, there was a bit of fear that came into my heart, like something's wrong. And then he said, "I need to use the restroom." And I thought, that's bizarre. And he was in there a long time. And I just thought, please get out of my house. And then he left. And I called a friend immediately after. And I said, "I don't know what just happened, but that felt predatory." But I will say that even though it felt predatory, there was a part of me that didn't want to fully take it in, because I had known him for about almost 4 years at that point. And I had not seen him to be that way. This was a guy who was a worship leader, a nice guy. People liked him. Uh, we would pray together. He said he loved the Lord. So there was a part of me that couldn't quite take that in all the way. And then the month happened, and it became very clear very quickly that he was not going to honor these boundaries. And if I was at church and I would go to my car, he would be right next to my car when I was leaving and want to talk to me. One time he was in his truck and he had the window rolled down. And as I walked to my car, he was like, "Hey, hey." And I said, "Look, I need to go." And he said, "Look, I feel like I've lost my oxygen." And I said, "I'm not your oxygen. Jesus is your oxygen." Okay. And I remember I went to get in my car. So I opened the door and I close it and look up, and he's already beside my window, tapping on the window. And I just, man, this isn't feeling right. And I'm starting to tell people, like, something's wrong here. And it just got worse. It just got worse. He would find me if I was out walking the dog. He started showing up at my house at random times. One time I had gone to the movies with a friend, and he had dropped me off, and it was late. It was 9 o'clock at night. I get home. No, I'm home a couple minutes, and the doorbell rings, and I thought, oh, I must have left something in his car. I open the door, and there's Ted. This look in his eyes, and he's like, "What are you doing? Where are you going?" And I said, I just got back. I was kind of in shock. And he said, "Who are you with? Who are you with?" And it was just this tone. And I looked at him and I said, "None of your business. You need to stop this." He said, "Well, I saw somebody drive away when I drove up." And he kind of like pushed his way in and wanted to have this conversation. And he was saying things like, "I need to stay in front of you because I don't want you to be with another man, and I don't want to be with another woman." And I was like, okay, this is sounding really wrong. This is much more than somebody having a hard time with a breakup. And I felt fear in that moment. And I just said, "Listen, I can't make my heart feel something it doesn't. You need to leave." And so he left. And I remember the next morning when I went to put the garbage out, my gate wasn't shut. And I realized he must have been walking around my house on the outside of it, while I was gone. And so, I'm telling friends, uh, there's a bunch of stuff that happened. There was guys at church that started meeting with him to try to help him. They actually made it that he couldn't come to church if I was there, and then that turned into he has to take so much time off of church because I was ready to just go somewhere else because it was becoming frightening. It was becoming something that was not okay. Kind of taking a step back before before all of the heavy stalking. When after that month was over of space, I met him in a public place because I was clear I was not going to have him come over to my home anymore, just to tell him I just want to make sure we're really clear that uh, there's nothing here. And he asked me to marry him. And then I think I met with him in a public place one other time because I was having this tension of like, I feel sorry for this guy and bad for this guy. And yet something's really off and weird. So it needs to be public. And then like I said, then the stalking just became very heavy. And it was very clear that he was not letting go and not giving up. And there was no empathy for me. It wasn't like he was fixated and sorry. It was like he was fixated and wouldn't leave me alone. And then the truth came out. The truth of what had really happened during our relationship, the fact that he had actually cheated, that he had been paying for sex acts, uh, and who knows what else, right? In my experience, when somebody can hide that well, and sociopaths do hide that well, uh, what they share is the tip of the iceberg. Now, this was not Ted sharing this with me. At this point, there was no contact, no conversation. I had very, very clearly put up very strong lines. But again, he would still show up at my house. He would find me when I was walking the dog. There was one time I was out walking the dog and he pulled up beside me. It was 6:30 in the morning on a Sunday morning. And he pulled up beside me and rolled the window down. And I said, "You need to leave me alone." And I went to walk. And as I walked away, he said, "Hey," he said, "Do you think I'm crazy?" And I said, "What?" He said, "Do you think I'm crazy? Do you think I'm a crazy person?" And I said, "I don't know if you're a crazy person, but you're acting really crazy." And he said, "Yeah, I feel really crazy." And I felt sorry for him. And I think that was the intention. And that's another way that hooks can get in our hearts. It's like people that operate, whether they're narcissistic or sociopathic, they're often really, really good at eliciting sympathy. They're really good at putting the tears on, at victimizing themselves, at, putting themselves in this meek position. And Ted was brilliant at it. I felt bad for him. And I think a lot of other people did too. But the truth is, he was actually very manipulative and very calculated and very overtaken. For somebody to know the truth to that degree and then be able to walk in this duplicity of life to a degree that I didn't realize what was going on, it shows quite the manipulation that's happening. And, sometimes even if we have great discernment, when our hearts are hooked in, that's when the enemy gets us. And he had me. That assignment was really meant to take me out because what had started to happen before I broke up with him, it was like it was as if something parasitic was draining the life out of me, but I didn't understand what it was. My life started to feel dull. I started to feel dull. I didn't have the same tenacity and exuberance that I'd always had. And that's what that kind of spirit will do. It's typically a Leviathan spirit that is connected in with somebody who operates as a sociopath. And Leviathan is often is in tandem with Jezebel, but it's not uncommon to have Kundalini in there too. The Kundalini spirit is a mimicker of the Holy Spirit. And so when you get that combination and somebody really being partnered with it, where they are living this life of instantaneous dark pleasure while still maintaining an image of light, that person is ravaged inside, but these demons are beginning to operate to a greater and greater and greater degree. And that's the whole point. That's the point. Now, was he aware that he was the assignment meant to take me out? I have no idea. I don't know if he was aware or not, but that was the reality. And so as his fixation became more and more, it just got weirder and weirder. I was one day in the afternoon, I went over to a plaza that I frequent, and I went to this place where there's a massage therapist there who does medical massages. And so I just so needed it for obvious reasons. And I'm sitting in the lobby, and all of a sudden, Ted is right in front of me. And I just went, "You need to get out of here." And so that became what was happening. And like I said, there were people trying to help, and, he had, confessed some of the cheating stuff. And he had also confessed to someone who he didn't think any of this was going to get out, by the way, in the way that he shared it. But I think the Lord has a way of bringing things to the light. I did find out what he actually did in my bathroom that day that he groped me, and not okay. Not okay. So this was all absolutely devastating. I was navigating through all of this and just trying to keep my head above water and stay close to God. And then finally, somebody came to me to tell me that Ted had propositioned them uh, at church on the guise that I had badgered him so much about my jealousy of this person that it drove Ted to proposition them. That's what he had told this woman. And this woman came and shared it with me. And that's the moment that it all hit me the hardest, because I realized this is a full on predator. It was, of course, all lies. I had not badgered him. And not only that, the way that he did it, the narcissism, the just the sociopathic nature of what he had just done. I just, I just thought, you know what? I know people are trying to help him. It's not working. It's just not working. And so in October of last year, a dear friend helped me, and it was a lot, but I went to the court and I filed for a restraining order. And that is not an easy thing to do, not only just because of how it is emotionally, but like it's court and it's a lot of paperwork, and it's a daunting task. And then after the commissioner signed it and granted the temporary, so that's what happens with a restraining order. It's called a domestic violence restraining order. Anytime that there's, fixation, stalking, or on up to physicalities and things like that, that's the kind of restraining order that you get. And so I went ahead and filed it. The commissioner signed it right away. And so what that meant is that it becomes in effect until a hearing where it's then decided how long it goes into permanence. Well, from that moment, I then had to get him served. And that was a whole other thing. So finally, he's served this restraining order. And I'm thinking, okay, now I'm going to go to a hearing, and it's going to take about 15 minutes, and the judge will hear my story and then decide how long does this restraining order go into permanence. They go up to 5 years. And I remember the day I was contacted by Ted's attorney to say that they had requested a continuance from the court. So that meant it was going to be pushed out later. So instead of this hearing happening in November, it got pushed out to February or something like that. And I was really stunned that he hired an attorney. And again, just shocked. And so in February of this year, I went to court. And what I thought was going to be a 15-minute hearing, 20-minute hearing, turned into something very different. It turned into Law and Order. This attorney that Ted had hired, I think he hired somebody who was an extension of him, somebody who would go as low as possible and just make this into a dramatic mockery. And that's exactly what this attorney set out to do. He actually requested to the commissioner that it be he needed 45 minutes to an hour. And that meant we couldn't do it as a regular hearing. We had to come back that afternoon. There had to be witnesses because he got the declarations thrown. I mean, it was this whole thing. And so I had read on the court website that I got to sit with my support person and that the support person would be there with me and that that's how it worked. Well, his attorney requested that I go up on the stand. So I had to go up on the stand. So I'm on the stand and I shared the whole story of everything that had happened, all the, everything, things that I've shared here. And I shared more detail about all the times he stopped over. And, I got cameras at my house. Another thing that had happened was the receptionist at my chiropractor's office had pulled me outside because Ted was going there and had told them that we had broken up, but then was coming and lingering when I should have been going for an appointment. And they quickly realized something was wrong. Her words to me were, I felt such a darkness. We were very alarmed for you. And so we want to make sure that you're safe. So I'm testifying to all these things. And then his attorney just started coming at me and, accusing me of things, accusing me of being this manipulative older woman that was enticing this young man, and that this young man was just immature, and that I was the one because I know psychology. And I was like, I'm not a psychologist. But he had this narrative that he kept trying to spin. And, we lived together. And I said, we didn't actually live together. And he said, what do you mean you didn't live together? Wasn't he staying over all the time? I said, he was over all the time, but we didn't cohabitate. There's a difference. He didn't pay bills. He didn't get his mail there. He didn't move all his stuff in. We didn't have a cohabitation, not a legal cohabitation. And so that became a thing. I mean, railed, railed for in every way that you could imagine. I was mortified. And I remember I had a moment where I thought, I'm going to crumble. And then I just prayed and I felt the Lord go, I got you. I got you. And I just thought, no, this guy is not going to do this. He's not. And so I was able to get through it, but we ran out of time. And so that meant there was another court appearance that happened. I want to say it was in April. And we finished my testimony and then one of my witnesses and part of another witness, and ran out of time. And it was more of the same. There was an email. It was an email or a letter I'd written back in 2023. And I had used the words living together in it, only because of the conversation that Ted and I had where I had said, it feels like we're living together. It doesn't feel right. And so I had used language in this letter. Well, that became a big focal point. She impeached herself. She lied. Meanwhile, this guy, Ted, had responded to the paperwork for the restraining order by saying that he had never, never come by my home unannounced. He had never followed by car. He had never done any of those things. So it was, it was quite funny that I was being accused of being a liar when, here he wasn't admitting to anything. But I had an email from him where he apologized for coming by the house multiple times unannounced. Another thing that had happened in January of this year is I had met some friends at the Reagan Library. And because the exhibit there were so many people coming to the exhibit, I had to buy tickets online. And so I got an email saying what time we needed to be there. You had to be there at a certain time. And I'm driving up trying to find parking, and there he is. It's like middle of the afternoon on a Thursday. It wasn't like, oh, he randomly ended up being there at the same time that I was. I mean, it was just creepy and weird. And so I ended up having to hire this attorney, and it was so God. And I will tell you, you all, when I was in the midst of this, I was doing podcasts. I was hinting at some of this stuff. This is what I was going through. And I had moments with God of like, why is this happening? I mean, this is like my worst nightmare. I'm terrified of government because of the things that have happened to me. And here I am in a courtroom with somebody trying to run me over when I'm just trying to get protected. Like, that's it. The second time in court, after court, one of the guys from church, he's a big guy, and he had seen it. He had met with Ted. He had tried to help him. And when we walked out of the court, he actually walked up to him and said, "Are you really going to do this before God? Is this really what you're doing? Like, is this really what you're what you're going to do. And Ted replied with, I didn't ask to be here. I was dragged here. And this gentleman looked at Ted and said, you better not take communion, bro. You better not. Because he was just, the falsehood of it. The other big pain point the second time in court was he had these witnesses that were character witnesses. Anybody that was involved in any of the, uh, not just the relational aspect, but all of the things that had happened after, all the fixation, all the, showing up, any people that were involved in that were there to testify for me because they had all seen it. I mean, some of the guys had reached out to me that had been meeting with him to say, I hope you're protecting yourself because I think he's a sociopath. I mean, I never understood stalking until this guy. So they were all there supporting me. But Ted had found a couple of people that, didn't know the situation. And obviously he's really good at playing the victim and the meek one to testify as a character witness. But he also had someone there, a woman that I had helped a long time ago and hadn't talked to in a long time that knew us both, but loosely. And who knows how Ted had stayed in contact with her. I don't know. But she was even there as if she was going to testify against me when I didn't even, I mean, who knows? Ted had come into some money at the end of our relationship. So I guess this was why he was able to, get this attorney. And who knows how that all worked out. I have no idea. Those people did not end up testifying against me. We didn't even get to that in the second time in court, but it was just seeing this person and going, really? This is crazy. I mean, it was such a battle. A friend of mine had said to me that getting the restraining order, it wasn't just a line in the natural, it was a line in the spirit. There was a spiritual battle that was just flying all around me that was so much bigger than what was happening at court. During this time, the Lord led me to really cut my family off completely and really come into a place of safety and just a prayer for their repentance, but not in connection to me anymore. It had just become too dangerous. And so all of that is going on as I'm, battling this thing. And so finally in September, so this is very recent, you all, went into court for the third time. By this point, the commissioner had become a judge. So we'd been at the process for almost a year. The commissioner had become a judge. And so now we were in a courtroom and it was all day. This wasn't just a simple hearing, which is normally what you do for a restraining order. This was a full hearing. It's like a trial with just the judge presiding. I had an attorney, through a series of events. God led me to this wonderful attorney. The way that the Lord showed up for me during this time, you all, I don't even have words, but I'll try to give them words. This was also when I was transitioning my business and I went into that season of sabbatical because the Lord called me into it, but I didn't really have resources had dried up. I mean, it was a tough time. God didn't waste a moment of that. People came out of the woodwork and were like, I'm loaning you this, or I'm giving you this, or it was something. I've never been in this position in my life. It's not something I've ever done. I've always been the person since I was young that, I'm a worker. I'm driven. I've always been very self-sufficient. And this was a season where it just became too heavy. And people, just beautiful people, came and were like, I got you. I got you. I got you. And there was a point in the beginning where I was kind of embarrassed, like, how did I hear wrong? I hear so well. And you know what? None of us are Jesus. We all can have those areas of our lives where we can be mistaken, where the wrong spirit can sound like the Holy Spirit and it can be in our heart and we can grab onto it. That's why we need each other. It's why we need Jesus. But this was a battle of battles that was happening. And in September, we come into the courtroom and right in the opening, his attorney says, "Oh, I'm moving. We dismiss this case because I have this. What was it? I have this video." And so he goes into this whole thing about how he has this video evidence that I have broken the instructions about sharing details of the case with the witnesses, because you can't do that, right? You can't share details of the case with the witnesses so that it taints their testimony. And that I had broken that because I had shared in front of the whole congregation. And what it was is that I had given a word on crushing season at an event, and I had shared very veiled about court. I didn't share any details of the case. I didn't share the person's name. I didn't share any of that. I just shared I'd had a rough experience and that it was very crushing. And so he starts telling the judge, like, we need to listen to this video. And my attorney's going, you didn't submit this evidence before. And he's like, whatever, like, I still have a right to bring it. And so my attorney says, Your Honor, my client is saying that she was very careful to be vague, and his attorney is, adamant we need to hear this video, and he's shared a few clips of it. Not meaning he wrote notes. She said this. She said that she felt betrayed. She said that she found herself in a courtroom and that she was separated from her support person. And, it's very clear that the message that she's sending is that she's the good one, right? And I'm sitting there, you all, and I am praying because I am like, Lord, I know I didn't say anything wrong in that video, but I really don't want to spend time having that part of the video shared and having to be torn down. Like, I don't have it. Like, my bandwidth is pretty low at this point. And it was a really interesting scene in the courtroom because there were about 15 to 20 people on my side of the courtroom. My attorney was this young, petite, like, little innocent looking thing, precious lady. And then on his side, there were two people on his side, his attorney, who was dark, and him. It was oh my gosh, it was so intense. And so I'm sitting there going, oh Lord. And the judge says to to Ted's attorney, where did you obtain this video? He said, my client. She said, does your client go to this church? And he said, no. And she said, does your client go to an affiliate of this church? And he goes, no. And she said, well, this is a bit like stalking, isn't it? And he was still insistent that this video be watched. And thank goodness for my attorney, who knew the law so well and very quickly said, well, the law requires that any of this kind of evidence be presented on a flash drive and that there be a transcript. And she looked at his attorney and said, do you have a transcript? I see you're reading notes. And he said, no, I don't have a transcript. And the judge was like, okay, we're done. We're moving on. This case is not dismissed. Let's move forward. And so I my testimony had already been completed. So there were a couple more people that testified for me, and then Ted took the stand. And I got to see the lying in action, and it was quite a sight to see. It was really hard to be in there. Here's this person who's stalked me had stalked me up until even that January incident happened while the temporary restraining order was in place. But from that moment, once we hit that court in February, he backed off. But I have to be in a courtroom and I have to sit across from him. And the lying I was just dumbfounded at how well he lied. There were a couple of things that he didn't lie about. It almost felt like there was a couple things he was too afraid to lie about in front of me. But there were other things. He was really adamant that we had lived together. And he even claimed that he had moved all of his clothing in and that he didn't move furniture in because I have furniture. And that when I broke up with him, he had to remove 10 like big bags of clothing. And I'm like, I was like, what? And I'm looking at my attorney and I'm like, it took him less than 5 minutes to gather the couple of things that he had and leave. What? The day that he, tried to kiss me and grope me, he claimed that we had gone to lunch and I invited him over to the house, and he said it just like that. He claimed another big thing that had happened is that the day that I filed the restraining order, so it was in October, the day that I'm going to go to the court and file the restraining order, I'm out walking my dog and he drove by me right around the corner from my house while I was walking my dog. Now, keep in mind, he lives a good 35 miles away. and it was early in the morning. And I was like, oh my gosh, talk about clarity that I was doing the right thing. So he claimed that the reason that he drove in the neighborhood is because a therapist told him to process his memories. So he was driving to process his memories. He didn't deny showing up at my home, but claimed that, she just let me in, and like as if everything that he had done was appropriate. And so then he had a witness come up, and it's funny, his witness actually testified that all of his clothing was at his residence. Like, he didn't move his clothing in my house. But we came to the end, we came to the closing arguments, and his attorney just railed me. My attorney did an incredible job of just staying on task. She wasn't snarky, she wasn't rude, she was just very professional. His attorney took the approach of tearing me down. He claimed that when I said that Ted had yanked on my jacket, and when I had said that Ted had tried to kiss me and, pulled me on the couch, that those were lies. That, here I'm accusing him of bludgeoning me and assaulting me, and I've lied. And he really honed in on that. He said that, I was still married when I met Ted, and so therefore I'm this adulterous woman, and that I lied about us living together. And he just went at it in this closing argument. And I started to sink inside. And the reason I started to sink inside is because one of the challenges that I've had in my life is that I can be very easily accused. I am the person that errs on the side of over responsibility. If I feel like I've made a mistake or done something wrong, I can be like overly concerned about it. And so the problem is, and that it has been a bit of my programming. It's the gaslighting that I grew up in, the gaslighting I experienced in my marriage, but also the way that Satanism and mind control works. It's like they do these horrible things to you, but then it's your fault that they're happening. And so there was this deeper element of programming in there that it has been one of the things that I've been working through a lot, especially recently. And so I started to feel like, man, is the judge going to believe me? Like, this is horrible. And I very clearly heard the Lord's voice. Sandi, I told you, you will have victory. You can stress if you want to, but there's no need for it. And so then the judge went out to take her, whatever time, right? Her 20 minutes or however long it was. And she came back in. And the moment she started talking, my whole body just went, she said, we were just talking about this at lunch, that, domestic violence covers an array of areas. There's physical, but there is also emotional, and it does cover emotional safety. And she went down every single one of Ted's attorney's closing statements and refuted everyone. She said, she said, first of all, she said, I found Miss Derby's testimony to be very credible. I felt like everything that she said, she was being very honest about. The other thing that Ted's attorney had tried to argue was that the only reason I filed for the restraining order is because I found out that Ted cheated on me. And so the judge said, I don't believe for a moment that that's why we're here. It was months after she found out about that he had cheated on her that she even filed this restraining order. It's very clear that she exhausted every single avenue before filing it. She said, I did not find, and she said his last name, you, Ted, to be credible. I did not find a lot of your testimony to be credible. And even the things that you're testifying to are alarming. And she said, I want to look at the notes that I wrote about when you stopped it by her house. And then as she's looking at the notes, she goes, and she even had to put cameras up at her house just for protection. You showed up at her house late at night. Even if there were times that she let you in the home, you had a 4-year relationship. That doesn't make it okay that you kept popping up everywhere. And so she just went down every single one. And I just felt my spirit lift. And I just felt like, oh, thank you, Lord. And then she ended it with saying, I know that we've been in this process for a year, because his attorney was also arguing, like, look, we've been in this process for a year. The temporary's been in place for a year. Let's just walk away as is. And she said, but given what I've heard, I actually find that there needs to be a longer time. So I am putting this in permanence for a year, which was a huge victory. And, she said some other things that were really great. And I remember just like, I can't even tell you what I felt in that moment, but it was extreme relief. And I felt the Lord's heart. And then it was just being able to realize like there was a whole crew of people behind me. There was like, the Lord was like, I have sent you an army because this was such a battle that was so much bigger. I think there's elements of Ted that align a lot with my mother and a lot with my family. I feel like there's parts of him that align with even other family members. There were spirits that had hooks into me, and the Lord was breaking me free at a deeper level, even the mind control level, to say, you're going to live in freedom. And it was very clear there was something about when the judge gave the order that I felt it in the spirit. And I felt something free inside. And I went, oh my gosh, Lord. And then after that, there was the legal fees. And so what my attorney did is went to Ted's attorney and said, look, if you've paid the legal fees now and we don't go through the court, it'll save you like $1,500. And so, of course, Ted's attorney came back with an email saying, I've conferred with my client, and basically went back to the same old narrative. It's as if the judge never said anything. He claimed that I only had a partial victory because and the reason my victory was partial, and the reason he was saying it was a partial victory is because my attorney asked for 3 years and we got 1 year, but we knew we would probably get 1 year. I mean, it's so ridiculous. But he said, you know, and she lied about these things because she said he bludgeoned and assaulted. And it was just the same story. And I could not believe how twisted it was. And I felt that check in my gut again, and I felt sick. And then I thought, you know what? It's okay. He can believe what he wants to believe. The Lord knows, and the Lord has protected me. And so we negotiated something out. And so I finally got that payment. And so I've been finally released to share this story with all of you. And I knew that the Lord was calling me to. And I have to tell you that a couple days ago, no, it was not a couple days ago, it was probably a week, 2 weeks ago. I was just praying and talking to God. And he said, do you know why I waited to have that restraining order put in permanence? And I'm like, why? Because that was a nightmare to go through that. He said, I waited until the commissioner had become a judge, because when the judge issued the verdict, it carried greater weight in the spirit realm. It created more of an authority, because a commissioner is somebody who's on their way to being a judge. And I was like, what the Lord has done through this, you all, I mean, there are parts of me that I didn't even know were still under, some of the effects of some of the things I'd been through. I mean, he sent me people during this time. I got to go see people that helped me through this. People came in and supported. There were all those people supporting me at court. And I can't believe I'm sitting here going, the Lord did a really, really amazing thing through all of this. And so I just want to say to anyone out there who is listening, please take this word in. Please know that if there's an area of your life that you haven't received blessing in, where it feels like you keep coming up in the same old story, lean into the Lord and ask, like, what's inside? What are you doing? What's going on? Where do you want to free me? Sometimes our most crushing, egregious, humiliating circumstances are soil for the Lord's greatest fruit if we lean in. And I will tell you all, I'm still processing a bit. I did a lot of processing while it was happening, but I was in survival mode to some degree. I've needed some time to filter through all of this. And yes, were there voices before I came on today to go, I don't think you should share that? Sure. But I'm going to share it anyway, because it's the Lord's story. He takes some of the most painful, egregious experiences and he turns them into something beautiful. He ended up setting such a line in the spirit. I feel it. I feel the freedom. I feel the difference. My life has started to open up. The doors that are starting to open and the things I'm starting to walk through are incredible. And it came with a lot of crushing. And sometimes when we have these really big callings from the Lord, some of the journey is hard. Now, do I think that God wanted me to be with Ted? No, I don't think so. I don't think any father would be like, this is the man I want for my daughter. But did he use it in every way? Yeah. Did that assignment that was meant to take me out, did it end up setting me free in deeper ways? Yes, it did. But what a journey to get there. So I just want to say to all of you, thank you for listening. And I really pray that there are things in this story that you can grab onto and know that he's always working. And even when he seems silent, he's got you. He's definitely got you. So thank you for listening. It's been amazing to be with you today. Please like, please subscribe, please share, and let's keep getting this stuff out there. Thank you.